Today let's cover how to shorten a motorcycle fork. I have a 1981 Suzuki GS450L which I am customizing. I want to lower the front end by shortening the fork. I'll do this by adding a space around the damper rod and cutting the fork spring to match. I've already had the forks apart and cleaned them up, so that's why you won't see fork seals, oil, and some of the other components during the video. I'll start by removing the top cap and fork spring, then I'll loosen the damper rod seat from the lower fork leg. After that, I can pull out the stanchion and shake out the damper rod assembly. Again, I'm not showing all the seals and other parts so we can focus on the actual process of shortening the fork. For the spacer, I'll be using 3/4 inch EMT pipe, but you may need something different. The spacer needs to have an inside diameter larger than the damper rod with an outside diameter smaller than the damper rod seal. The spacer will go on the damper rod below the spring. I will be going with 2 inches for a change in the ride height and travel. To cut the EMT, I'll use a standard tubing cutter. You slowly increase the cutting pressure as you rotate the cutter around the pipe. Here is our spacer. I'll clean up the ends to remove the burrs from cutting with a bench grinder and wire wheel. You could use a file or a variety of other tools to remove the burrs also. Now I'll put the spacer on the damper rod. I'll start by removing the rod seat, then sliding off the spring. Then slide on the spacer and the spring and the rod seat until we put it back in the fork. Moving on to the spring, I'll be cutting the end at the top of the spring, which was near the top cap. The spring will be cut the same amount as the spacer length, so you want to carefully measure to make sure they match up. I'll use an angle grinder to cut the spring, being careful to line up with my cutting mark and keeping the cut surface as clean and flat as possible. After that's done, I'll go back to the bench grinder to remove burrs from the cut surface and smooth it out. Now putting it all back together, I'm omitting the fork seals and oil since I'm still in the mock-up stage and will be tearing it down again later. With the spacer on the damping rod, I'll put that back in the stanchion, then shake the assembly to bring the rod through to the bottom. Now we can put the damper rod seal on and lower that assembly into the fork leg. The spring is slightly tapered at the bottom end, so make sure that end goes toward the bottom of the fork stanchion. Next, I'll tighten the hex bolt securing the rod seat to the bottom of the fork leg. There's a small amount of spring that is compressed when reinstalling the top cap. Reinstalling the top cap is much easier when it's on the bike, but I'll snug that up here on the bench. Now heading back over to the bike, let's put the fork leg back on. I'll be using fork boots, but we'll shorten them up later. I'll leave them on here to help show the difference. We'll tighten up the bottom and top bolt to secure the fork assembly. Here you can see the difference between the two forks after only modifying the one on the right so far. I'm also planning to slightly lower the rear end with different shocks, but after the build is done, I'll see how it rides if I need to make any tweaks. So time will tell if these changes are what I end up using long term. If I did want to change the fork back to stock, I would need to get new springs and remove the spacer. So that concludes how I shorten the fork on my Suzuki GS450. Hopefully this was helpful if you are considering a similar change to your bike. So please like and subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments how similar modifications have turned out for you. Thanks for watching.